James Muir is the founder and CEO of Best Practice International and the best-selling author of the #1 book on closing sales, The Perfect Close. James is a 30-year veteran of sales, where he has served in every role from individual contributor to executive VP. James has extensive background in healthcare, where he has sold to and spoken for the largest names in technology and healthcare, including HCA, Tenet, Catholic Healthcare, Banner, Dell, IBM, and others. His guidance comes from experience and the school of hard knocks. His mission, to make the complex simple. James's greatest professional joy comes from teaching how being genuinely authentic creates the highest levels of success and happiness.
I want them walking out knowing they've learned something new and so fired up that they go out and immediately put it into action.
Please welcome James Muir.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. But I gotta tell you, it was kind of a tough sell to get here. Do you know that? And that's because on this day, 25 years ago, I was married to my beautiful wife, Marin. That's right, today is our 25th wedding anniversary. And we thought we were gonna be somewhere tropical right now, so I had to sell Marin on the idea that this was the best place for us to be right now. But Marin loves it. We've been all over the world together, and we've been to all the Outbounds together. So in a way, Outbound is our anniversary too, right? Now, the bigger question is this. How would you like to walk out of this session knowing the absolute best practice in closing sales? One that's just 2 questions, 0 pressure, and 95% effective. Again, it doesn't involve any pressure, but instead will actually strengthen your relationships with your customers in an authentic way. And I know that sounds like an incredible claim, but it is 100% true. There is no tricks, there is no manipulation, and it will be 100% congruent with your own personal values. Now, how many of you are down for learning something like that? Yeah? Are you? Okay. And before we're done, I will share with you how I used it, very poorly I might add, to close the biggest deal of my life. So hang on, I'm gonna go fast, and I'm gonna give you both barrels right now. And let me start by proving that wild claim that I just made. So by raise of hands, how many of you have heard of a company called Gong.io? Yeah? Gong.io is a call analytics company for companies that do outbound sales calling. And they analyzed over 1 million sales calls looking for the answer to this question: what is the best closing approach that there is? And after analyzing over 1 million sales calls, they determined that the perfect close, which is the approach you're about to learn right now, is hands down the best closing approach that there is, bar none. And that top performers use it 3 times per hour, on average, per hour, which should tell you that it doesn't get old the more that you use it, okay? Now, before I tell you what those 2 questions are, let me ask you guys a question. What percentage of sales situations do you think end without any commitment being asked for whatsoever? Raise your hand if you think it's like 50% or more. Okay, all right, we got some. All right, keep your hand up if you think it's 60% or more. Okay, all right, 70%. Hands up. 80%. Okay, all right, you guys are hardcore. 90%. Guess what? You are right. 50 to 90% of all sales encounters end without any commitment being asked for whatsoever, right? And it varies a little bit by industry, but 50% is actually the low number. So why is that? Why don't salespeople ask? And what I can tell you is that it basically boils down to just 2 things: skill and will. And will is having the desire and being comfortable asking, and skill is knowing how to ask. So let me ask you another question. Between those 2, which one do you think is the more common reason that people don't ask for questions or ask for commitments? Raise your hand if you think it's skill. Okay, raise your hand if you think it's will. Yeah, it's will, isn't it, right? Now, the good news is I'm gonna help you with both of those things right now. So let's talk about skill for a second. So 50 to 90% of all sales encounters end without any commitment being asked for whatsoever. I gotta tell you, that's just like a mind-blowing statistic to me, right? So why don't we ask? And what I can tell you is that a huge contributor to that amazing statistic is the fact that 99% of all of the closing techniques being taught out there today are manipulative. They are, and they all have names. There's the alternate choice close, or there's the yes set close, or there's the impending event close. There's even a close out there called the what would Jesus do atomic bomb close. I am not kidding you, that is a real close, right? There's 1 million of these closing gambits out there, and they're all manipulative. You want to know why 50 to 90% of all sales encounters end without any commitment being asked for? It's not because we're afraid to ask. It's not. It's because every single one of these techniques damages trust. And we don't want to damage trust, right? We want genuine, long-lasting relationships that last a lifetime, don't we? And we instinctively know that all those sneaky gambits, that they damage trust. And so rather than use a manipulative technique that's going to damage the relationship, we just don't do anything. At least that's what I used to do. But there's a better way, a way that doesn't damage the relationship, a way that makes the customer feel like they're in control, and a way that makes you a consultant and a coach rather than a pushy salesperson. Now, obviously, that's the perfect close. But before we get into it, let me just kind of point out that before you go into any sales interaction, it's really important that you have a couple of outcomes in mind. Okay? And what I mean by that is, what do you want to happen as a result of your meeting? And what you should have is an ideal advance and a couple of alternative advances. Okay, let me explain what an advance is just in case you don't know. So the world of selling owes a debt of gratitude to this guy, Neil Rackham, who conducted the largest sales study ever conducted. It involved over 35,000 face-to-face sales interactions. And we learned a ton about selling from his research. And he ended up coining the phrase an advance in relation to a sale. Okay? And his simple definition of an advance was just moving the sale forward in a little way. Okay? Moving the sale forward in a little way. And the reason that he had to come up with this term is because he discovered that 9 out of 10 sales interactions don't end in a win or a lose. That's not what happens. What happens in 9 out of 10 sales interactions is we either get an advance, where the sale moves forward in a little way, or we get what he called a continuation, which is a situation where the sale is going to continue, but no progress is made. So before we go into any sales situation, what we want to have is an ideal advance, which is our best possible outcome, and then we want to have a couple of alternative advances just in case our ideal advance turns out to be unrealistic for some reason. Does that make sense? It's a little bit like having a backup plan. Okay, and with that prepared, you're ready to execute the perfect close. And there's just 2 questions, and it's pretty common that you'll only need to use one of them. And that first question is this. And by the way, this might be worth writing down right now, okay? The first question is, does it make sense for us to X? Does it make sense for us to X? Where X is our ideal advance. Okay, so an example of that might be, does it make sense for us to schedule an assessment to see what our best options are? In that example, the assessment is the X, or the ideal advance. Now let's think about this for a second. There's only 2 things they can say. They're either going to say yes, or they're going to say no. If they say yes, then awesome, we just got our ideal advance and we're off to the races. If they say no, then we're just going to ask them our second question. And that second question is some variation of, wait for it, wait for it. Okay, well, what do you think is a good next step? And what I can tell you, after hundreds of ride-alongs, is that in 90% of cases, customer will suggest a very logical next step for where they're at in their buying process. And guys, that is a key point, because the best close is the one that the customer is ready for. And by doing it this way, we're just pacing the sale at the rate that the customer is ready for. It's when we try to push a customer faster than they're ready for, that's when it starts to feel like manipulation to them. Okay, but doing it this way, it's easy and it's completely non-confrontational. Okay, now there's a couple of nuances, but basically this is the model right here. And so what we end up with is either an advance or a close every single time we use it. Literally, if you did nothing more than use this simple model right here, you'd end up with an advance or close 90% of the time. Pretty cool, right? Now, this is not my first presentation, so I know what you're thinking. You're like, hey, James, 90% is pretty good, but it's not perfect. Why, oh why did I call it the perfect close? Okay, well guess what? Guess what? You're right. We can make this even better. As it turns out, there's actually 5 variations of the perfect close, and what you just learned is the kindergarten version. And so the first enhancement to the perfect close that you're going to learn is called the suggestion. And with the suggestion, we're just going to use a little prefix before that first question. And that prefix is something like this. Other clients at this stage tend to do X. Okay, something like that. So as an example, I might say, other clients at this stage typically have us do an assessment to see what our best options are. Does it make sense for us to schedule an assessment for you guys? Now, do you see how facilitative that is? It's still zero pressure. In fact, it's helpful, isn't it? Just for fun, raise your hand if you sell something that people rarely buy. I don't know, like 2 or 3 times in a lifetime. Yeah? I got a few. All right, well, okay, so you know what I'm talking about, right? Those customers do not have a lot of experience in making that kind of a purchase, right? So our suggestion of a logical next step is helpful for them, okay? Now, as it turns out, you can use that suggestion model in the secondary question. So instead of just throwing them the ball and saying, hey, what do you think is a good next step? We could instead say, well, you know, sometimes customers at this stage do this other thing. Does it make sense to do that? Now, do you see how we are just coaching them along in the process, okay? Now, I want to pause for a second here because there's some additional nuance and some additional variations that once you fully understand them, you're going to realize just how perfect this is. But what I can tell you after all these years is that the stem of question one is just so simple that it's very easy for people to miss its power, okay? And so do you want to know what people are worried about the most when you're teaching the perfect close for the first time? What they're worried about is what if the customer says no to their ideal advance, okay? And so let's think about this for a second, though. If we ask them, does it make sense, and they say no, well, what have they said no to, really? Did they say, no, I will not buy? No, because we didn't ask them to buy. Did they say, no, I will not take your course of action? No, because we didn't ask them to take a course of action. We only asked if it made sense. We're not really asking them to do anything. At its core, does it make sense is a timing question. And so the customer cannot reject our course of action. They can only reject the timing of it. Are you guys tracking with me here? Because this is a key point. With the perfect close, the customer can't reject your course of action. They can only reject the timing of it. But the best part is they can clearly see the direction we're headed, but we haven't actually asked for commitment yet. We've only asked about the timing. And guys, what that means is regardless of their answer, we end up on emotionally much, much higher ground, so we can't bum out, okay? Now, this is the suggestion model we were just talking about. And when we use the suggestion model in the secondary question, we call that the fallback, okay? So with the fallback, if we don't achieve success with our ideal advance, for whatever reason, we're just going to use one of those alternate advances that we prepared. That's why we prepared them, right? Now, as it turns out, you can fall back multiple times. Don't ever do it more than twice, okay? That's self-serving, and we're just doing this to help the customer. So I'm going to walk through this just so you get an idea of how this works. So I say, hey, does it make sense for us to X? If they say yes, awesome. We just got an ideal advance, right? If they say no, then I might say, well, you know, sometimes clients at this stage do Y. Does it make sense for us to do Y? If they say yes, great. We just got an advance. If they say no, and I feel good about it, I could suggest another thing. I could say, well, you know, sometimes clients at this stage also do this other thing. Does it make sense for us to do that? If they say yes, great, we get an advance. If they say no, we're just going to throw the ball back to them and say, okay, well, what do you think is a good next step? And then they're going to suggest one in 90% of cases. Pretty cool, right? Now, guess what? There's an even cooler version. It's called the add-on. And the add-on is exactly the reverse of the fallback, okay? So instead of us falling back to our advances, we're going to be adding them on instead, okay? So once we achieve success with our ideal advance, we're just going to keep on piling on advances until we match the pace that the client's ready to go, okay? And the key here, which is very important, by the way, is that we're just pacing the sales cycle to match the client's buying cycle. If they want to go faster, we're going to go faster. If they want to go slower, then we're going to go slower, okay? Now, there's one other unique aspect to the add-on, and that is that at the end, we're going to say something like this: are there any other logical steps we should be considering right now? And what that does is it gives the customer a chance to suggest any action items or next steps that make sense to them that maybe we hadn't even thought about. So let me share an experience with you on this one. So me and my sales team were working with a healthcare organization in Sierra Vista, Arizona. And we were presenting to the wrong people, at least that's who we thought. It was a CIO and his IT staff. And so our ideal advance was to parlay this demo into a meeting with the executive management team because that's who we thought was going to be making the decision. So when it comes time, I asked this guy, I say, hey, does it make sense for us to schedule a demo for the rest of your team so we can get their input and participation? He goes, yes, that's a great idea. We need everybody on board. I'm like, woohoo, cha-ching, right? I just got my ideal advance. So I just look at my list. I say, well, you know, a lot of clients at this stage will have a scheduled time for our technical people to talk about the conversion. Does it make sense for us to schedule time for our technical people to talk? He goes, yes, my guys are really worried about that. That's a great idea. I'm like, cha-ching, woo, I'm 2 for 2. So I just look at my list. I go, well, you know, I think we've got everything we need here to create a proposal. Does it make sense for me to put together like a preliminary proposal just so you can get a feel for the scope of the project? He goes, yes, that would be super helpful. I'm like, wow, cha-ching, right? I'm 3 for 3. I'm totally spent. That's all I had prepared, right? So I just asked him this last question. I say, Well, all right, are there any other logical steps we should be considering right now? And you'll never believe what this guy says, right? This will just blow your mind, right? So he kind of looks around a little bit, and then he lowers his voice, and he goes, well, James, is there any chance I could get a copy of your standard agreement? Because our legal people can be kind of slow. Pretty good sign, right? Pretty good sign. So, of course, on the outside, I'm cool as a cucumber. I'm like, why, of course. I'd be happy to get you a copy of our standard agreement, right? But on the inside, I'm like, yeah, baby, are you kidding me? Of course I can get you a contract, right? You ever have a moment like that? Yeah, it totally rocks. And here's the crazy thing. I never even dreamed that, we didn't even think we were presenting to the right people. I never even dreamed that sending a copy of a contract would emerge as a realistic next step. And in fact, I think if I'd even suggested something like that, I just don't think it would have come off, right? But instead, by diplomatically pacing it at exactly the rate that this guy was ready for, we scored an amazing 4 advances, one of which we never even dreamed of, right? So obviously, this is the most fun out of all of the different variations out there because in a smooth and Zen-like fashion, we just keep piling on advances until we've matched the pace that the client's ready to go. Pretty cool, right? Now, let's do a quick review. Look what you've learned already in 15 minutes. Okay, you learned the 2 questions of the perfect close. You learned the suggestion model, where we say other clients at this stage do X. Does it make sense for us to do X? You learned the fallback, where we use that suggestion model to fall back to one of the alternate advances that we prepared. And you just learned to add on, we're in a smooth and Zen-like fashion. We just keep piling on advances until we match the pace that the client's ready to go. Okay? Now, there's one more variation I want to share with you that's called something special. But I want to ask you a question. So by raise of hands, how many of you are faced with quarterly or even monthly pressure to close business? Yeah? Yeah, of course, it's right. It's part of being in sales, right? Me too, me too. Okay, so let me ask you another question. Again, by raise of hands, now be honest, how many of you have ever tried to discount a deal in order to get a customer to close sooner? Yeah? Yeah, okay. I'm guilty, I've done it. Now let's think about it for a second. What are we doing when we do that? What are we doing there? We are trading margin for timing, aren't we? We're trading margin for timing. Okay, and by the way, I am officially not a fan of trying to use discounting to accelerate timing, but I've worked for publicly traded companies for 2 decades, and so what I can tell you is the revenue recognized this quarter is worth more than that exact same revenue recognized the following quarter because of how it affects the stock price. And so you can imagine, I got a long history of executive management encouraging accelerated sales quarter after quarter after quarter, often by whatever means possible, okay? And before we go, one more question. By raise of hands, how many of you have ever tried to discount a deal in order to get it to close sooner, and it didn't work anyway? You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, it's kind of like getting kicked while you're down, right? And how many of your customers forgot about that discount after the quarter was over? Any of them? Well, mine never did, okay? And so the key point here and the underlying principle that I'm dancing around is that if you ever mention a concession to a client, you're going to end up giving that concession. There's no going back. Even if you're super clear that a customer's not going to get a discount after a certain date, you'll still end up giving that discount 99% of the time, even if it doesn't meet your time frame. And despite the fact that everybody knows this in sales, the tactic of trying to discount in order to accelerate a sale is rampant across the entire sales industry. Okay? And so the something special variation that you're about to learn solves that problem. It's very popular with managers and sales leaders, so I'm pretty sure you're going to like it. So let me tell you how it came about. When I was first in sales, I had this big whiteboard in my office. Okay, and it had all of my deals on it. And this one quarter had exactly 10 deals on this whiteboard, okay? And one of them was very close to closing, and the other 9 are all somewhere in the middle of their buying process, right? So a couple weeks before the end of the quarter, we get a call from upper management. We're saying, hey, they're saying, we got a very tough quarter, right? We're having a challenging quarter. We need to use all legal means possible in order to bring in more business. You guys recognize this drill? Yeah, so I was encouraged to offer discounts to all 10 of those deals as an inducement to get them to close by month's end, which I did. And every single one of them knew that that discount was contingent upon getting agreements before the end of the quarter, and that they would not get that discount if it came in afterwards. Again, you guys recognize this? All right, well, how do you think it worked out? Well, I'll tell you. Only one deal came in. And which deal do you think that was? Yeah, the deal that was already close to closing before we started offering discounts to everybody, right? The other 9 all just chose to continue their evaluation rather than take advantage of the discounts. And of course, I kept working those into the next quarter and ultimately closed another 7 of them for a total of 8 out of 10, which is amazing. But with every single one of them, I had to have this awkward conversation with them about whether they were going to get that discount that they saw the previous quarter. And you know what they'd say? They'd say, James, if it was worth it to you before, why isn't it worth it to you now? And if I would resist, I could literally see the erosion of goodwill on their faces. Does anybody else recognize this? Am I the only one? Yeah, all right, so fortunately, near the end of the very next quarter, it was like Groundhog Day, right? I found myself in the exact same repeat fire drill as the previous quarter, where management was encouraging us to offer discounts to close business, right? So thankfully, I used that opportunity to offer the same discounts that I had before, and everything ended well. But, and this is the point of the story, with lower margins. Because if they hadn't seen that discount before, I wouldn't have had to give it to them the following quarter. And so it was that crazy downward spiral, right? We offer a timing discount, but then we don't actually get the timing that we want. And then I have to give that discount the next quarter anyway. And then we get lower margins, I get lower commissions, and then we inadvertently train customers to seek end of quarter discounts. It was that crazy downward spiral that got me thinking, man, there has got to be a way to see if a deal can really close by end of quarter without telegraphing any kind of a discount. And that's how Something Special was born. Now, Something Special is really just a standard perfect close question that reveals the client's timing without telegraphing any kind of a concession. And a lot of professionals have told me just this one close is among the more valuable things that they've learned in selling. I'll let you guys be the judge of that. Here it is, verbatim, okay? Does it make sense for me to see if we can do something special for you if we can get everything wrapped up by the end of the quarter? Let me say that again. Does it make sense for me to see if we can do something special for you if we can get everything wrapped up by the end of the quarter? Now, naturally, you're going to adjust the time frame to match whatever your situation is. But otherwise, I really recommend that you use this verbatim. And going into that conversation, I don't want you to have any kind of a concession in mind. Don't have one. Okay? Determining exactly what the something special is going to be is going to require a second conversation and a second meeting. And you want that. You want that. That's a good thing. And what your attitude should be going into this meeting is, you know, I don't know what my options are without talking to some people, but if the timing is right, I'll go see what I can do for us. Okay? Does that make sense? That's the attitude you want to have going into this. Now, the beauty of this is if the timing isn't right for your customer, you're never going to have to say what the something special might have been, and your margins will be preserved going into the next quarter. Okay? On the flip side, if it is possible to get things wrapped up, you've got a couple of choices. First, you could ask the customer what they would value the most, not promising anything. And then as a second step, you're going to go see what you can do, and you're going to come back. Okay? Now, these aren't mutually exclusive. I do both of these things. The only time you wouldn't want to do option number one is if the force is telling you that this customer might request some kind of a concession that you can't deliver on. Okay? If you sense that that's going to happen, then don't do it, because you're just going to be setting an expectation that you can't meet. Okay? Now, I know you know this already, but I'm going to say it anyway. And just remember, guys, you have a lot more concession options than just the price. Okay? I have often been literally stunned by my clients' preference for what concession they were looking for. Right? So don't assume. But based on what's going on inside an organization, customers very often value things on services and other things that have nothing to do with the price. And what you're kind of looking for is something that's of high value to them, but of low cost to you. Okay? Now, I created a vignette for you on this so that you can get how this works. Okay? So I'm talking to Gary, the executive here, and I say, hey, Gary, does it make sense for me to see if we can do something special for you, if we can get everything wrapped up by the end of the quarter? Gary's like, our CEO's out until after the holidays. We wouldn't be able to do anything until he's back. Good to know. Right? Margin preserved. Now, this next vignette this actually happened to me. This is a real conversation, right? So I say, hey, Gary, does it make sense for me to see if we can do something special for you, if we can get everything wrapped up by the end of the quarter? Gary's like, well, what are you thinking? Okay, me. Well, I don't know what my options are without talking to our CEO, but if we can actually do something this quarter, he said he'd be willing to work with clients. Gary, well, if the offer's good enough, we're ready to do something. Why don't you go find out what he's thinking? Okay, so what did he just do there? He just threw me the ball. So what am I going to do? What he wants me to do is he wants me to tell him what the concession is. Okay? So what am I going to do? I'm going to throw him the ball back. I say, you got it. Just to speed the process up a bit, is there any part of the proposal that you get more value out of another? I'll see if that's an area I can play in. He says, yeah, there is actually. Allison's worried that some of our people are going to need more training than usual. So anything you can do in that department is going to make me a hero with her. And from my perspective, it's the maintenance. And if there's something you could do with the maintenance, either lower it or start it later, that would be great. So that's it, maintenance and training. See if there's something you can do there. Now, boom, do you see how this works? First of all, we've determined we can make this deal happen inside our time frame. Okay? Second, this customer just very kindly handed to me on a silver platter the 2 concessions that they value the most, neither one of which was the price. Okay? All right, now let me tell you how not to do this. Okay? So this is about 17 years ago. And one of my brand new reps comes to me with a deal he wants to close by end of quarter, right? Customer's got the proposal, they've been through all the stages of the sales cycle. So what my rep really wants is he wants me to give him permission to offer a discount to get it closed by end of quarter. Do you guys recognize this? Yeah, all right, so I just told him to use the something special variation that you just learned, okay? In fact, I had him write it down, okay? And I said, just ask him, does it make sense for us to see if we can do something special? And he goes, well, what if he says yes? What's a something special? I'm like, we got a lot of options depending on what they might value the most. Let's just see if the timing works, okay? And he goes, well, what kinds of things are possible? I go, we got a lot of options, right? I mean, we could play with the terms, or we could play with the deposit, or we could change the licensing scope, or we could play with the maintenance, or we could even get him some user group passes. I mean, there's a lot of different directions that we could take it, okay? And he goes, well, can we get him a discount? And I'm like, yes. Discounting is one of the options. Let's just start with the timing, and then as a second step, we can figure out which concession is going to be the best one, right? So he runs out of my office and he's all excited, right? So a couple hours later, I see him in the hallway and he's looking kind of down and dejected. I go, hey man, how'd your call go? And he goes, oh, your question didn't work at all. I'm like, really? What happened? He goes, he got all mad at me and told me to create another proposal with a bigger discount on it. I'm like, whoa, that is not usually how it turns out. Why did he get mad? He said he'd let me know when he was ready to buy it, and he was upset that we hadn't already offered him our best price. And I'm like, so he immediately assumed that something special meant price? That's kind of strange. And he goes, yep, now I got to create a new proposal. And he marches off. Well, it just so happened that at that time we were testing a brand new phone system that was recording the phone calls for coaching purposes. Yeah, you're thinking what I'm thinking, right? It's like, I'm going to go listen to that call, right? And here's what I found, right? Instead of him saying, does it make sense for me to see if we can do something special? Instead of saying that, he says, if you could close by the end of the quarter, I can get you a bigger discount. And guys, that is completely different than what I instructed him to say. And what he was doing, in effect, is he was asking, will you close by the end of the quarter if I give you a discount, okay? And that makes the question about the action and not the timing, which is a big deal, okay? Now, I kept listening to this call, and I hear the guy say this. He says, I haven't even given the proposal I have now to our board yet, and we don't meet until the 15th of next month. So by changing the question, my rep had put this guy in a difficult position. And that's the thing that made him mad. And he didn't say it on the call, but I could tell he thought it was going to be impossible for him to pull together an impromptu board meeting in the next 2 days. I could also tell that he was sold. He really wanted the solution. It was just a question of timing. And so when I'm coaching my rep afterwards, I said, why, oh why did you change the question so dramatically, even after I had you write it down? And here's what he said, and the point of this whole story. He said he thought he was speeding things up by changing what was going to be a 2-step process. First ask about the timing, and then about what the concession is, all the way down to one question. Will you buy if I give you a discount? Okay? Now, I want to sneak in one key principle here in the time we got. Timing issues are not pricing issues. Timing issues are not pricing issues. Guys, if the person that signed your contract is going to be out of the country until January, cutting your price in half is not going to accelerate your sale. It's just going to destroy your margins, right? Because they're going to ask for that when it comes back. So timing issues are not pricing issues. Now, what can we learn about everything that I've shared with you so far? First, asking about the timing of a possible action is very, very different than asking directly for that action. It gets a different response, and it feels emotionally very, very different to the customer. Second, the perfect close is a 2-step, 2-question process. And sometimes you will only need to use one question. But typically trying to accelerate it and shortcut it backfires because you're introducing all the risks of a direct close and you're eliminating all the benefits of a perfect close. Just be patient. Your customer will let you ask your second question. They're not going to stop talking to you. And third, I would just say I would recommend that you use the phraseology I've given you at least at first. There's plenty of room in there for you to customize it to your own style, and you should absolutely do that. But just have an understanding how the question works before you change it so that you don't accidentally ruin it. Okay? Now, I also promised to share with you how I closed the biggest deal of my life using the perfect close poorly, okay? And I've closed a lot of deals worth millions of dollars. I closed a $10 million deal with Banner Health Systems, okay? But by far, the biggest and most important deal that I've ever closed is asking my beautiful wife, Maren, to marry me. And back then, before I was a wealthy bachelor, I thought I was a big deal, right? And I had this all planned out. And I took her to this expensive French restaurant, and I had her, the chef bring out the ring under this crystallized, see-through dome of sugar on a silver platter. And so I had the ring on this silver platter, right? And I was literally going to ask her to marry me using the perfect clothes. Does it make sense for us to spend the rest of time and all eternity loving and caring for each other and raising kids and this whole thing? And I had it all written out. And it's too bad I didn't read it too, because I don't know, guys, when I got down on one knee, I just got so nervous. And so instead of saying, does it make sense? It somehow came out, it doesn't make sense. Then I'm like, oh no, I'm blowing it, right? And it was like a whole world was spinning around me, and I started saying all this gibberish in front of her and all these people. And then, like the saint that she is, she while I was drowning, she reached out her hand and she grabbed my hand and she said, yes, I'll marry you, right? She saved me. And that brings me to my final point tonight, and that's this. Intention matters more than technique does, okay? Intent matters more than technique. And you just learned some great technique here. You just learned the best. Okay, but guys, if you go into that conversation when your intentions are flawed, your customers will detect that. And in most cases, the deal is off. On the other hand, if you enter that conversation with genuine intent and a sincere desire to authentically serve the customer, they will detect that too. And even if you screw up the technique all over the place like I did, your customer will reach out and they'll save you because they can tell that you actually care. Thank you so much. I wish you the wildest success. I'll see you at the next Outbound.